So in our previous video, we talked, or we had just touched on toxicity characterizations. And so we spoke about DDT and its metabolites and how they affect the body in different ways based on just what points or substrates or everything that they hit. So we did a little research, and so we found a study where fish were given DDT dosed foods, and so the researchers just wanted to see their elimination routes and how fish actually got rid of toxicants, especially organochlorines, how they got rid of those from their bodies. So, like I said, in the study, the fish were given DDT dosed foods. They were exposed to spiked foods for 7 days, and then they had a 2 week period of depuration in a flow through system. So this just means that they were fed non-contaminated foods for an extended period of time. So this includes having regular water changes, and they even removed the feces as soon as possible to prevent the contaminants from reappearing in the body, or having the feces being broken down into the water and once again being put back into the food and everything, or into the bodies of the fish. So from this study, they found that the elimination of total contaminants from the fish after dietary exposure was slow. So only 38% of the ingested DDTs, which means DDT and its metabolites, all of them, were eliminated from the body after 2 weeks of depuration. So they compared this to the aqueous exposure. So from the fish who just got DDT and everything else that they dose the foods with, and they just got it through absorption through the water. They eliminated that. They eliminated that a lot more quickly. So 44% of that was eliminated as opposed to the 38% from dietary exposure. So based off of this, they inferred that when a contaminant is eliminated too slowly, it results in the accumulation of the pollutants in aquatic organisms, which we do know happens with organochlorines. They are accumulated in the body.
So this accumulation that we're talking about in the fish results in a variety of negative responses. For example, it results in immunosuppression, reduced metabolism, and also it can even damage their gills and epithelia. So those are all important things to take note of. And as secondary receptors, humans are also susceptible to negative results. And of course, the EPA and other environmental groups, they're more concerned about the human aspect of it. So humans, some of the negative effects can be endocrine disruption, and of course, a higher risk of cancers and immune suppression, similar to the fish. And we talked about this in class, but the toxins can cross the placenta and are often found in breast milk. So fetal exposure is extremely important to take note of, and it can affect various things such as behavioral function, neurological function, and cognitive function in both infants and children. So very important developmental effects. So the advisory against the fish consumption is especially important for pregnant or breastfeeding women.
So the risk management that is done or is about to be done, the EPA hasn't officially started the cleanup for this Superfund site, but they do have a $446 million plan proposed. So obviously this is a very hefty amount for a plan that just got proposed, 9 months ago? Mm-hmm. So it's been 17 years since it was officially said that, oh, the harbor is really messed up and we should probably do something about it. But within those 17 years, they have done some research and gathered enough information to, one, put out a fish advisory and also have a proposed budget for whatever they're thinking of doing. So plans for the area includes having some form of large-scale water filtration. Just based off of the documents that Angela and I read, they haven't gotten the details down packed as to what they want to do. They do have it proposed, like written in their proposal, that they're giving themselves 3 to 4 years to figure out a concrete plan before the 13-year remediation starts. So they're doing a lot more research and everything. But one of the plans is to do a large scale water filtration. One idea that they could also use to do this filtration is to use clay minerals to remove the heavy metals of the water. What was it? The minerals?
So we researched and found that they're still looking to see the exact mechanism, but it is a possibility that the clay minerals can actually absorb and end up disintegrating the heavy metals that are in the water from the pollutants.
Yeah, and some of the metals that were included in this clay mineral study was dioxins and mercury, and a lot of the things that we did find that were found within the Portland Harbor. So another plan that they had, and they do have a series of plans. They had, I think, about 3 different options of what they could possibly do for this area. But one of the plans that they had was to dredge contaminated sediments in the riverbanks just to see if they could somehow remove the contaminants from the soil that way, as opposed to completely, gutting the harbor, which is pretty much impossible and not the most ideal way of getting anything done. So, as a short term solution, and what they've been putting in place for the past couple of years, the Oregon Health Department has put out a notice that Portland residents can and should reduce their local fish intake, and that they should focus on primarily consuming migratory fish species in the area. So, non-resident fish that are coming through the area are salmon and steelhead. And so those are coming through, going to the Pacific Ocean or going to points where they can lay eggs and, start a new fish life, I guess. And so they are majorly coming through the Portland Harbor to get to other points. A lot of them come from the Umbqua River in Oregon. I'm pretty sure I didn't say that right. But they're coming from that river in Oregon. So they're moving through the harbor specifically, since that is such a very big hub and it's kind of a central location point for the connection for pretty much a lot of the water sources in the area. But they're coming through the area of the Portland Harbor, and they are considered an excellent source of high protein and low fat. And so that is a very healthy alternative to not eating contaminated fish. So they have no restrictions placed on them from the health department about the amount that they can eat from the Portland Harbor. Like we said, we expect that this exposure is chronic exposure, since the health department isn't that concerned about migratory fish species coming in and being eaten, because they wouldn't be likely to just pick up like one random source of PCBs or DDT or PAHs from the water and everything. So those are pretty much required to be eaten from the area.
So it's not only just focusing on eating the migratory fish, but it's also important to look at how, if local fish is one of the only options that a family has, it's important to see how they should be eating the fish to minimize any possible pollutant intake. So, a safer method on consuming fish is to try and decrease the amount of fat. So, as we said before, pollutants are often stored in fat. So, the fish should be cooked with methods that allow for the fats to drip off. So, methods like grilling the fish, boiling the fish, and even baking or smoking the fish are recommended because it does allow for the fats to drip off so that they're not being consumed. And another way is to focus on removing fish skin and fats because the contaminants can, I guess, be concentrated in those areas, and they could do so by cutting off the parts that contain the most amount of fats when preparing the fish. And on the slide, the picture we have sort of shows how they should be cutting off, what they should be cutting off, and how to remove the skin.
Another notice that we did have was from his name is Dr. David Stone.
Stone, yeah.
And so he has done a lot of research on behalf of the Oregon Health Department. I'm 99% sure he works there. But he's done a lot of research and posted a variety of research documents and PowerPoints on behalf of the Oregon government about ways that people within the area should reduce their fish intake. I'm sure I said earlier, but the majority of the people who are living by the harbor and who are susceptible to getting contaminated from these fish or getting contaminants from these fish are minority communities, also really poor communities, as well as the local Native American tribe that live within the area. So these are the communities that are extremely susceptible to getting ill just from consumption, but are also the communities that are heavily eating the fish from this water. And so an advisory that he put out was to cut away the fats and everything because they're more than likely going to be eating this. But they also said to check for the size and the age of the fish that you're also getting, which is really hard to do if you're just on your boat fishing in the middle of the harbor or the river or something. But if the fish is too big, you shouldn't be taking it from the water, as well as if I guess seasoned farmers would be able to know this, but if the fish are too old, obviously they're going to have higher chances of bioaccumulating all these contaminants within their bodies. So they're having a lot more contaminants in their bodies than, I guess, a younger, more spry fish could possibly. So just look out for warning signs like those. So they have an advisory against the size of the fish that you can get from the harbor now, as well as the age of the fish, which I think would be the hardest part to, determine and actually differentiate from. They also recommend eating a lot more cows. Yeah, one of the advisories was, eat more burgers, eat anything but fish because it's not really helping. And the fish in the area isn't just being used for like frying or grilling or boiling. They're using it to make paste and soup and literally everything else within the area, which is why it's so detrimental because the fish is such a staple part of the diet of the community within the harbor or like within Portland, Oregon, I guess, because they're surrounded by water. So, yeah, but the fish is such a staple part of their diet. So they're not just saying, oh, let's go fry some fish for dinner or something. They're literally incorporating it in every dish. So if they're making chicken or something, they're cooking it in like fish stock or literally everything that you could possibly think of. So there are multiple routes of exposure that they're getting as opposed to just using, the fish meat. They're like breaking down the bones and everything. So they're getting contamination heavily through that way. Obviously, the bones aren't going to be like the main source for contaminants, but there is still a possibility that it's there as well.
Yeah, there can always be remnants in any part of the fish, really.
Obviously, one of the other concerns that we have, or that the communities have based on their migratory fish species, is that they are coming in only during certain points of the year. So if they're really that concerned about consuming like the carp and the bass and the catfish and everything that are in surplus and abundance within the area, then it's also going to be a concern as to what to do once these fish species, the salmon and the steelhead, aren't coming through the harbor anymore during certain parts of the year. So it becomes a point of being too expensive for the people who live within this area to actually go out and actually get salmon and get steelhead because the prices are going to go up and they have gone up within the area because they know the water is contaminated. They know you're not supposed to eat the fish from the area. So why not bump the prices up for the stuff that you can eat and the things that are going to be good and healthy for you, as it usually is within virtually anywhere. Everything organic is always going to be more expensive. But that's one of the biggest problems for the area because, like I said, these are really poor communities that are living by the harbor. And so it's very hard for them to fork out the money and actually have the resources to go and buy salmon and steelhead from the store when it's not in season, as opposed to going out and catching them. So they are still going to be ingesting the carp and the bass and the catfish. So they're constantly being exposed to all of these contaminants.